Tonight you're going to be taking notes about angles formed from parallel lines cut by a transversal. So we're looking at angle relationships, and we're just going to fill in the blanks here for some of this vocabulary and discuss the angle relationships as we go. So lines in a plane that do not intersect would be our parallel lines. And in this case, it would be line N and line P. These two lines would never ever cross each other. You could extend them in both directions forever and they would never cross each other. Parallel lines. Okay, our next term, a line that intersects two or more lines. We have a big name for this, and that is transversal. It's a fancy name, but it's not difficult. This is line M is our transversal. Line M. Okay, you'll notice when line M intersects the parallel lines that 8 different angles are formed. And we're going to talk about their relationships. Our first term, angles that are on the same side of the transversal and are both above or both below the parallel lines. So, same side of the transversal, both above or both below. These are called corresponding angles. And you're familiar with the word corresponding from our work with similar figures, and we talked about corresponding sides and corresponding angles then. So examples of corresponding angles would be angle 1 and angle 5. These are both on the left side of the transversal and both above their respective parallel lines. And what you need to know about corresponding angles is that they are congruent. So we can say that the measure of angle 1 equals the measure of angle 5. Also, the measure of angle 3 equals the measure of angle 7. And the measure of angle 2 equals the measure of angle 6. And the measure of angle 4 equals the measure of angle 8. We have 4 sets or 4 pair of corresponding angles. Okay, our next term, angles found inside the parallel lines on opposite sides of the transversal. So inside the parallel lines on opposite sides of the transversal. These are called alternate interior angles. Alternate interior angles. Alternate is another word for opposite, and interior is another word for inside. These are also congruent angles. So we could say that the measure of angle 3 equals the measure of angle 6. And the measure of angle 4 equals the measure of angle 5. And so we could, as an example, we could say angle 4 and angle 5 are alternate interior angles. Okay? Our next term talks about angles found outside of the parallel lines on opposite sides of the transversal. So, outside of the parallel lines on opposite sides of the transversal have the name alternate exterior angles. And you might have guessed that they are also congruent. So we can say that the measure of angle 1 equals the measure of angle 8. And the measure of angle 2 equals the measure of angle 7. So for example, 2 and 7 are alternate exterior angles. And you might find it helpful in your diagram to write exterior above the parallel lines and below the parallel lines. And you may want to write interior inside of the parallel lines. Okay, now we have two more terms, and I'm going to have to move the paper up a little. So, angles found on the same side of the transversal and inside the parallel lines. So now, same side of the transversal and inside the parallel lines. These are called consecutive angles. And sometimes they're referred to as same side interior angles. So both of those terms are used. And these are actually not congruent. Instead, consecutive angles sum to 180 degrees, which is also known as supplementary. So here we can say the measure of angle 3 plus the measure of angle 5 equals 180 degrees. Or the measure of angle 4 plus the measure of angle 6 equals 180 degrees. Okay, so let me slide this down. Angles 3 and 5 are consecutive. They would add to 180. Angles 4 and 6 are consecutive. They would add to 180. Okay, our last term, a pair of opposite congruent angles formed by intersecting lines. And this word is, these are called vertical angles. Vertical angles, and it tells you right here they are opposite of each other and they are congruent. And they're formed by intersecting lines, so they have a common vertex. So we can say here that the measure of angle 1 is equal to the measure of angle 4. The measure of angle 2 is equal to the measure of angle 3. The measure of angle 5 is equal to the measure of angle 8, and the measure of angle 6 is equal to the measure of angle 7. So when we look back at our picture, our diagram, your vertical angles are 2 and 3, 1 and 4, 6 and 7, 5 and 8. Those are your vertical angles, and those are also congruent. Okay, so we will practice identifying angles tomorrow, identifying their relationships. And in the future, we'll talk about all these angles that are congruent and their measures and how to calculate missing measures. So we will see you tomorrow. Have a great evening.